Data. This is part of the STARTS Day here at Ars Electronica, a new digital deal. In this final session of the morning program, we'll dive a bit deeper into the relationship between data and creativity, exploring some of the tensions that artists, creatives, scientists, entrepreneurs, and us all actually have witnessed over the past decade or so, as more and more data has been collected and shared and used in so many different ways. I'm Elena Simper. I'm a scientific and technical lead of Media Future, which is a virtual accelerator and residency program co-funded with European public money. In Media Futures, we're working with 19 teams from all over the world, with startups, with artists, and with combinations of the two, in an area which affects us all greatly: online misinformation and polarisation. And you'll hear from some of these teams today and about their Media Futures project. But to set the stage, we'll start today with a talk by Dr. Julie Freeman, whom I had the pleasure to work with in a project in the UK called Data Stories, where we looked at people's interactions with data in a post-truth society. Back then, she was at the Open Data Institute in London, where she established their Data as Culture art program. And I have to say, I learned a lot from her. Through her practice, Julie translates complex processes and data from natural sources into all sorts of interesting artworks, and her work explores that relationship between science and the natural world, which has become so important in so many different ways over the past 18 months. She's trained as a computer scientist and as an artist, and in her bio I read that she considers the two to be the same, which is something I would love to explore at some point in time. She has a PhD from Queen Mary University in London, with a focus on the investigation of data as an art material, which I hope we'll hear more about today. So Julie, thank you so much for being here with us, and we're ready to hear more from you.
No problem. Thanks, Eleanor. I'm just going to share this. So yeah, I was going to just take the opportunity to talk about a few things that I've learned while I've been using data as an art material over the past couple of decades, one way or another. And just to explain how, just through the artwork, the things that have occurred to me that I think are important for my own practice, but also maybe could be helpful for other people to think about. But I wanted to start with looking at the idea of sort of perception of what we think we're looking at and what we're not looking at. And this image is a representation of one of my first ever drawings from nursery school. And my mum, they put me off to nursery school, and everyone at the end of the session, everyone came out with pictures of houses and, you know, their mum and dad stickmen and stuff like that. And I came out with all these pictures of almost perfectly drawn black circles. And when my mum asked the teacher how I'd got on, she said, "Oh, Julie's been really happy drawing circles all day." And apparently I got absolutely livid at the pair of them. And I was like, they are not circles, they are holes. And this was my kind of like first realization that actually what you're doing and what people are seeing can be very different things, especially when you're working with kind of abstract forms. So I think from a very young age, I was always kind of maybe looking at things in a slightly different way. But I think,
just to check if the presentation is playing, because we haven't seen the holes if we were supposed to see
oh,
it.
okay. Can you,
So we see the cover page, the
it
cover
says,
slide,
it
um,
says,
but we don't see anything beyond that.
are you seeing this?
No, we're still seeing data as an art material.
Okay.
Maybe we try to reshare that.
Yeah, let me stop it and start it. Oh.
This is 2021, people. We're at
It's
the
just like,
beginning of September.
why?
You
All
would
right.
think that with, yeah, so we see now the next slide. Now if we try to,
Okay. If I,
right?
are they moving?
So at the moment we see, I've learned that even the concept of data has power, but I don't know if this will advance unless you press a button or something.
Okay, because so
Yes.
it's not when I,
Yeah,
yeah, there we go. So what's happening is that if I
it doesn't
play
play
it, it doesn't
automatically.
show it. Okay, I
Yeah,
can do it like this.
yeah, no
So
problem.
yeah, okay, here's the whole.
So you were at
So
school,
apologies.
you draw
Here's
this,
the
you understood.
whole.
Yeah, okay.
So data, I mean, I think data is like is the fundamental material of currently how we see the world and how we communicate. It sits between human and machine communication, machine communication, and human to humans. It's how we kind of understand the world and ourselves. And it's such, it's so prevalent. I'm particularly interested in natural data. So ideally, my favourite material to work with is real-time data from living systems. Anything that is time-based and dynamic, I find really fascinating. And there's a lot more of it now than there ever used to be. And so one of the first projects that I worked on, which was using this real-time data, was a project called The Lake. And from it, I learned that even the concept of data has power. So data itself, but even just people thinking that there's data behind something can be really powerful. And this is a piece of work called The Lake, and it was installed in a lakeside, and it was a digital art piece that tracked 16 fish and used their real-time location information to create an immersive sound and animated environment. And what I realised from this project, we learned a lot of things, but one of the things was that I'd only tracked 16 fish out of 3,000 in this lake. And when the fishermen used to turn up in the morning, they'd come along to this is like a 9-metre tall steel cylinder, very resonant space. And you could go into the cylinder and look up and see the digital lake above you. And what I realised was that the fishermen, they were coming, instead of just coming and setting up their fishing tackle, they were coming into the art installation, looking at where the fish were and then setting up their tackle in relation to that. So they were using this piece of work as a sort of map. And I did explain to them that this is just 16 fish out of the whole 3,000, and it's really an indicator of where the fish were at any time. And yet still they kind of built it into their daily fishing lives, which was really sweet. I mean, I loved it, but I did think it's interesting that the power of just having this sort of real-time image of where fish are, that they wanted to cling to that. So another project that I learned, another sort of data fact, is about the idea of privacy of interspecies data and how much it matters. And this was a sort of learning that came out of a project called Rat Systems. Rat Systems was a project where I tracked 24 naked mole rats, or 28 because they had 4 babies, naked mole rats in a colony in an artificial environment. And we tracked their data, me and the keeper called Chris Fawkes, we tracked their data for nearly 4 years, got an enormous data set out of it. And we looked at their behaviours and how they moved and what they did on a daily basis. And it was an important sort of scientific work in the sense that normally these animals are tracked using manual observation, and the room is 30 degrees centigrade and it's really humid, so manual observation is quite difficult. So using the electronic tracking system, we managed to get data that nobody else has got on these particular animals. And from that data, I wanted to explore using it in different ways. So as a straightforward data visualization, as an animation, as some kinetic sculptures. And then one of the pieces of research I read while I was doing this was around, I was looking at the metadata of animals. And something that came up was that with animals, if you take photographs, say you're on safari, and the metadata associated with that picture that gets uploaded to, say, to one of the social media networks, poachers and collectors were using that metadata to locate the animal that you'd just taken a picture of. And when I was kind of like, wow, this is kind of the data privacy around flora and fauna. And it's not just animals in the African continent, but it is also rare flora and fauna. So it could be an orchid somewhere in Indonesia. And so what I did was took a series of photographs of the portraits of the naked mole rats, and then I redacted their eyes so that you wouldn't be able to identify them. And it's quite a playful piece of work, but it's fundamentally about the concepts of data and how we need to think beyond human privacy into the rest of the world. And this is that I've learned the word data is a very broad brush. I didn't think I learned that, but actually the more I thought about it, the more I witnessed the use of the word data in art forms, the more frustrated I got by trying to understand what people were meaning when they used the word data. So as part of my PhD and a part of my work at the Open Data Institute, I devised a taxonomy for using when you're describing data as an art material. And it's important because if you're, for instance, the Lake Project, if that wasn't using real-time data, if it was using archival data, it would be a very different piece of work. It would mean something different to the fishermen. It would have been something that is almost documentary work as opposed to a live piece. And whenever there's live data in a work, it gives it that special kind of frizz on, because you know that what you're looking at right there and then is something that is being generated by a living thing. So with the Data as Culture programme, I was able to use the taxonomy in our archive. And we've worked with nearly 70 artists, and there's about 100 works in the archive. And all of them are tagged with different data types. And I think it's important to, the context of how you're using data, what data you're using and where you're using it adds to the artwork. And I'd really like to see it described in a slightly better way going forwards. And you can have a look at this live on their website. One of the things that this site is particularly good at is providing a snapshot of data artworks, and a lot of them are works that you might not think are data artworks. So if you've come from a data visualization background, for instance, and you're considering most data art to be very digital or very animated or very kind of highly rendered, then this will give you a sort of glimpse of things of people doing many different things. You can see one of them there is like a cardigan, which is a data artwork. And so part of using the taxonomy helps people to use data in different ways, but it also helps us define whether we are working in the space of data art or whether we're working with data visualization. And this is, I feel like this is a bit of a bold move in my PhD thesis, but I wanted to define data art in a way that separated it out. So I use this word translations of digital data to create cognitive, physical, and or sublime artworks. And for me, that definition sums up the sort of malleability of data and how artists can play with it in different ways so that they do put their own voice into it. There's a poetic voice that can come through it if you're translating it. Whereas opposed with data visualization, this idea of sort of more direct representation, and this is something that separates it out. And I think this definition, there's a few of them, but from Card and their colleagues, this idea that the use of computer-based interactive visual representations of data to amplify cognition is something that is definitely different to using data in an artwork. And one of the ways that this, I feel, is highlighted is another piece of my work called We Need Us. And this piece is it uses data from the Zooniverse, and it's a stream of real-time, temporal, anonymized, open metadata that is used to generate the dynamics within this animated soundscape. And there's 15 compositions based on a different Zooniverse project. And Zooniverse is interesting because it's sort of like all about the humanity in the machine. So all of the Zooniverse website, you can upload, if you're a scientist, upload your data sets, and then you ask people to classify them. And a lot of the reason, one of the reasons that it's really important is that some of these data sets can't be classified by the machine because the machine learning isn't adept enough at, say, analysing a galaxy spiral. And I wanted to capture in this artwork that sort of humanity and say that, you know, people are still really important in the system, and actually they generate their own data. This is the metadata of the metadata from the Zooniverse website. And this is like, you can look at it live online. Something else that I've been thinking about quite a lot, and I love this idea that data is a numerical opinion. We often associate data as being really objective and really measured, but you know, there's so much subjectivity in anything to do with data. From the very beginning of the process, when you're collecting, what are you collecting and why are you collecting, and all of the privilege and the bias that exists within that. Kind of like, you might be collecting butterfly data, but you do it in a way that can access it. So you do it on your doorstep, which means that the butterflies in another part of the world that don't have access to that technology never get data collected, and then they don't become important, and so on. So all of these points in the data flow, how do you store, who has access, what license do you give it, how do you choose which statistical methods to analyze it with, all of that kind of stuff comes from, is a decision that is made. And when there's so many decisions in the data flow, how can the end result possibly be purely objective? And it's hard. So I think that, you know, there is a whole series of opinions, and this idea that data is a numerical opinion just helps us kind of remember some of that. And this was definitely inspired by Catherine D'Ignazio. I would really recommend just go into this. It's a single web page, but I think about it all the time. And she talks about very eloquently about how flawed the data visualization world can be. And it comes from this idea of like scientific representation also being biased, because it is like created by someone to put a particular message across. And I think it was George Orwell that said, when we invent new things, we have to invent the language to describe those new things. And that's what happens within data visualization and data art to an extent, because we're kind of trying to work out how to describe this stuff that we're harvesting. So then finally, and this is probably for me one of the most important things at the moment, is that I'm learning about data's ecological impact, and you know, the amount of waste data and the huge amount of data duplication that is around, and the amount of energy it takes to work with data is something that is really pressing. And in the middle of the climate emergency, I feel like if you're working with data, this is something that needs to be addressed. And so this is a bit of a preview of a project that is launching at the end of September at the V&A in London. And it's called ALICE, Active Living Infrastructure, Controlled Environment. And what the beautiful thing is that it is completely self-powered. So inside the structure are a series of microbial fuel cells that generate power because they use human urine to feed themselves. And the power that is generated runs a small computer. The computer then has sensors attached, and then it tracks the data. And with this kind of closed system, we've created a soundscape and animation, and then an overlay of the data visualization to see the fluctuation of energy that the system is creating itself. And for me, this is a really important piece of work, because it's looking at this whole kind of cycle of energy and data and translation, and it's all encapsulated in this one piece. So just to sum up all the things that I feel like I've learned through working with data, and I think they're all relevant. I'm particularly as I said, particularly interested in the kind of climate related stuff at the moment. But I think one of the things of working with data is all of these things show that we can learn as we're going along, and it is really playful. And I'd like to sort of just think about how we can use data as an art material and allow it to be malleable and allow it to be playful, and we can transform it and translate it and do things with it, but we can also retain some sense of sort of responsibility with that. And it's just so just going back to the whole for a minute, it's just like, it means many things to different people, and that is okay. So I'm just going to leave it there. I have no idea what the timing is, but I just wanted to give you a quick whistle-stop tour of some of the learnings I've had over the last few years.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're very well in time. So well done us. We're going to move now to the discussion part of the session. And Julie, I'm going to stay with you for a few more minutes, if I may. So you gave us this amazing overview of the various projects that you've done and the things that you have learned in your career. Let me just ask you perhaps something else, which might make sense, very little sense at the moment. But do you think data makes us more or less creative, more or less artistic? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think, I don't know if anything can make us be more or less creative in any way. I think for me, I'm inspired by data. I mean, and I'm inspired by the way it's used and the systems that create it and what we can do with it. And I find it absolutely fascinating that it's become like so pervasive, and it's become so protected as well. And I think for me, I see it, in my world, I see it as this kind of living thing that is that sort of exists beside us. I mean, it's a kind of digital nature in the sense that nature is always ebbing and flowing, and the data is always ebbing and flowing. But I think it can be anything. You can make anything creative. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to go on about the holes anymore. But for me, that drawing a hole was a super creative process, and everyone else is like, "Why is she just drawing circles?" But I think data can inspire for sure.
Do you think there is something we, as perhaps computer scientists and artists, since it's the same thing for you, could do to increase awareness of data as an art material? Is there something that you, in your experience, have done or experienced that you could share?
Yeah, I think so. Partly the taxonomy, being able to describe data as something that is that maybe that's an umbrella term, but actually describing at a more granular level the different types of data and what they can inject into the art you're making. That's really exciting for me, and I would like people to do that more. And also this idea of being able to access data so that you understand how it can be used and where it can be used. So I think one of the big blockages is there's certain types of data that people assume are easy to access. So people are really familiar with large photographic data sets, for instance, because of social media, or large text-based data sets, and even to a certain extent animal biologging, because it's something that we can get our heads around. But there's so many different types of data that are out there, and I think sometimes scientists don't think that it's interesting because they're looking at something else while they're collecting their data. But to an artist, often there's things that the data can reveal that they maybe hadn't been thinking about because it doesn't fit in with whatever their current scientific agenda is. So more discussion about data in a sort of open way of like, I've got this stuff, what do you think it means? How can we play with it?
Thank you. Any concluding thoughts for us to take home? Any final comments before I will allow some of the other panelists to share their views as well?
I don't know. I mean, and I say it all the time, but like data isn't truth. Just take it. You know, if we can hold it as a pinch of salt, and then it's just one story amongst others. That's the key thing, I think, for me.
All right, thank you very much, and thanks again for the talk. I'm gonna move to Hugo now, who's part of Obvious, a collective of researchers and artists that was set up in 2018, and so they are also working with us in the Media Future program on a piece called Evil Magic Mirror. And in general, their work explores this augmented creativity space, and they use lots of interesting technologies like NFTs and deep learning. So I'm very much looking forward to hear, Hugo, your views about this relationship between data, technology, and your work and creativity.
Thanks for the introduction and thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to take part in this panel. So, as you say, I'm Hugo, and I'm one of the 3 members of the Obvious collective. So we are 3 friends from high school, basically, and we wanted to work together to do something creative for the longest time. And 4 years ago, we decided to go with artistic creation with AI algorithms. Because basically I'm a machine learning researcher. I just got my PhD last June, and so I've been fascinated by machine learning algorithms since the moment I saw them. And so basically we gathered around this technical skill at first to ask us some question about artistic creation with this type of algorithms. And we basically ended up creating this artistic collective where we produce artistic series. So we have different type of physical artworks. We mainly do physical artworks because one of our core motivation is to talk about machine learning in general and try to get the people to know what is machine learning a bit better, and to kind of erase this view that AI is kind of a numerical cuisine that is going to kill us or something like this. And so we are trying to kind of showcase what machine learning algorithms can be useful for in artistic creation and more generally in all creative industries. And art is a great medium to communicate messages, and that's why we also decided to do artistic creation. It was kind of obvious for us to do so, and that's why we are called Obvious as well. And so as you said, we not only have physical creation, we also are involved in the crypto art scene for a while now, because we were actually invited to the beta version of Super Rare in 2018. So we've been there for a while, and we are very interested to see how new technologies can help spread new type and new forms of art. And that's exactly what we are interested in. So NFTs, physical artworks, and trying to work with data to do artistic creation is basically what we do at Obvious. And also I can mention that other type of projects that we have is also to kind of work on other type of creative industries, for instance, fashion or music or architecture and lots of different stuff. And we believe that the algorithms that we use, such as generative adversarial networks, clip, state transfer, etc., can be very useful for this type of creative people. And we would like to them to know about it and to get to use it a little bit more. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for this. Let me ask you one question. I am totally throwing away my script now, but there you go. Say, do you think that the those models that you're using, so that AI technology, generative networks, do you consider them to be a material, just like data is a material, or is the AI sort of co-creating the works with you?
So that was like a big question that we had at the beginning of our artistic career, and I think we evolved to see that the type of tool that we use, the type of algorithms that we use are tools. And basically, you can compare this to when cameras appeared in the 19th century. Basically, at first it was like a technological tool, and people started to use it for artistic creation. And there was lots of criticism that we also have today, such as it's blurry, it's only reserved to high qualified engineers, it's not art, it's going to replace art. And so we usually get those type of criticism as well. And in the end, we can see that photography is now an artistic movement that is widely accepted. And we believe that it's going to be the same for machine learning algorithms as research progresses and new algorithms are produced every day. We believe that there is lots of potential, and we think that artists are going to take this potential and use it in their creative processes.
Thank you for that. So we're going to move on now to music composition and experience. Say, welcome, Dave DeRoer. Dave is a professor at Oxford, a Turing Fellow, and a brilliant web scientist. But he's here because of something else, because of his personal research and interest, which sits somewhere between music and tech and AI. Say, Dave, are you an artist or a friend of artists? And following from that, what's your take on data and creativity in music composition and experience?
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you for having me. Gosh, that am I an artist or a computer scientist type question is a great one. As you say, Julie identifies herself as both. I work with a group at the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester called PRISM, Practice Research in Science and Music. And we are a mixture of composers, mathematicians, technologists, research software engineers, but I think we are all involved together in the creative process. So I don't want to draw lines between these boundaries. I'll say a little bit about the your point about creativity, and just I think talk about the AI piece. But first, just to mention that I came into this through algorithmic composition, and when I use that term, it sounds as if that's computers generating music, and often you could look at it like that. But for the purposes of today's discussions, think of it as listening to algorithms, because in our discussions now, the algorithms are themselves artifacts that we're interested in. Can you hear algorithmic bias? Okay, there's a question I'll just leave floating for later discussion. Everything I've done over the last few years falls under this banner of sort of numbers into notes, so it fits the theme of this very well. And also notes into numbers into notes, and that's the AI piece. So let's say a little bit more about that. The numbers into notes work actually started off thanks to Ada Lovelace back in the 1843. Ada Lovelace collaborating with Charles Babbage and his hypothetical analytical engine made a couple of sort of famous quotations which are still widely used today, which are quite relevant to this discussion. So one thing she said was, supposing that the fundamental relations of pitch sounds in the science of harmony and musical composition were susceptible of such expression and adaptations, the engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent. And that phrase, might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent, is one of the things I've explored. What does she mean by scientific music? And she was a musician. People think of her as importantly, as a STEM icon. She actually had mathematics and music competing in it for her attention. That sort of sets the scene for algorithmic composition work for numbers into notes. We've gone back to the mathematics of the 19th century, worked out what Ada Lovelace might have done. It's very much a creative response. We're not, we don't actually know what she would have done. The other really important quote for today's discussions is around creativity, and she famously, well, she said many things, but one of the things was that the analytical engine has no pretensions to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform, and so on. This is very widely discussed. It was discussed by Turing. It was discussed famously by Margaret Bowden in her Lovelace questions in the AI literature. and that's sort of sets the scene for the point I want to make, which is we seem to have got into a world where we're fascinated by, can computers do what humans do? And this world of computational creativity. And that's evident also in sort of the public engagement with these discussions. People love humans versus machines. Science fiction movies, excuse me, sell tickets because it's about humans versus machines. They're not about humans and machines living in glorious harmony. But you know, I would suggest they should be. So I think that we've tended to, actually AI researchers as well also seem to love saying, can we train this AI on Bach or Chopin or whatever, and then produce something that you can't distinguish from that? And we've done some of that, and it's great for having discussions with people about AI and engaging them in discussion about the relationship between maths and algorithms and music. Much more interesting, I think, is to treat the AI as a collaborator, as a kind of disruptive, creative force. And we've done a lot of work in Prism with a PhD student, composer, Robert Laidlaw, where he's really been composing music with AI about AI. And so, for example, in one piece, he trained the AI on his own work, prompted it with something, it responded. He used that as a prompt as a human to respond again back to the AI, and so on, and doing this at different levels of training. So it's very much a co-creative process. That's the really interesting thing. I'll stop there. I'm sure there are other things I can say in answer to your question.
Thank you. So thank you very much on your thoughts also about this idea of co-creation. I think 2 weeks ago I was in London at the Young Vic, where I experienced a theatre play that was created with the help of GPT-3, which is a type of AI system that generates text. And the experience was really about this co-creation process between the team that would normally produce a regular play and what that algorithm created. And as it happened, the algorithm also talked about AI. So the play that they created was about AI as well. Which leads me back to that metadata of the metadata of the metadata as well.
Absolutely.
Was talking about. I'm going to move now to Mariana. Mariana, I know that you wanted to share a few slides with us. So maybe we try to do that while I do. So Mariana is a performance artist. She's also a PhD candidate at the University of Amsterdam. What is with all these people who we all need to have PhDs for some reason? This is something for us to think about. But she's a PhD candidate at the University of Amsterdam, and she's a co-founder of Archival Consciousness. So Mariana, thank you for being here. Tell us more about the project and your experiences with data and creative settings. So we can see a black screen.
I think
we'll see the slides as well. Okay. Yes, there we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. My research is about collective reading infrastructures, such as libraries, and the book as a technology that is useful to think about reading in digital spaces, and to expand the idea of reading a book to reading in larger scales, like reading a database and reading a library. So in practical terms, I'm experimenting with implementing a knowledge graph for multiple cultural libraries as an umbrella on top of their existing databases, as well as developing a series of micro tools to allow that staff and readers aggregate linked data collectively and produce dynamic mapping and visualizations. Yeah, so these visuals are from the collection of the Apple here in Amsterdam, for example. So the library and reading are seen as two instances in the process of knowing that can be also replicated to other types of non-commercial environments. It is not about knowledge as an entity, it's about knowing as a process carried out by communities in dialogue, and dialogues grounded in the belief that ambiguity and uncertainty are important values. I'm quoting Johanna Drucker here. The collections of these libraries are in ruins of capitalist exploitation and in danger of extinction. The precarious circumstance offers also a productive environment precisely because they are left intact by not serving the interest of the market. I think that most of the existing AI and machine learning are not useful for the ethos of library. In the library, we don't want recommendation. We want browsing and discovery, especially because entire digital collections are available only through a search box. Millions of digital items are hidden in plain sight. I like to work in the infrastructure surrounding data. Since software and hardware only put into effect the model structure in their design. Therefore, the creation of digital tools, it must be an intellectual responsibility and not only a technical task. Unless artists and scholars are involved in the making of the digital systems and tools for our future, we are going to live in a future that doesn't work, without the methods and materials that we need. Nothing less than a way we understand and know is at stake. Data requires translation, transformation, and interpretation, and in the basis of this process, there are always humans involved. I think we need to stop drawing parallels between computational machines and the human brain, urgently. And when it comes to the development of digital tools, AI and machine learning, for AI and machine learning, data is often overlooked in terms of which data are using in training sets. That's why I also find that the collection of libraries are very interesting and extremely valuable, as they have a very rich content, but also because they represent situated bodies of knowledge and specific communities. In my work, I use the collections and also the space of cultural institutions to reenact and to perform algorithms within the context in which this data is produced, in order to visualize the whole process in detail, doing sometimes in a year what a computer would do in minutes. And I think that is really important, the aspect of context and three-dimensionality, and the relationship also of our bodies, space, and data.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mariana. May I ask if the collection of books you're showing is curated by you? So do these titles have a meaning specifically to the theme of the talk?
No, the titles don't have a meaning to the theme of the talk. These are part of a work that I'm doing now, also for Media Futures. So that's why I'm showing it. And yes, it is curated by me because, I'm prototyping system where the visitors will also be able to scan. So what you can see in these books also is that they are the books from the library. You can see that there are the labels and everything is there. So we are also treating them as objects, material objects. So to say.
Thank you. And I think that idea that you message that you had, that for some types of resources like books, they're hidden in plain sight, among other things, because of the tools, the digital tools we have to access them. Would you see a positive, a constructive role for data and technology in this? So I appreciate that the search box is suboptimal, to say the least, but do you see, perhaps as Hugo was saying, do you see technology perhaps as an opportunity as well, and as a tool that one could use to tackle some of these challenges?
Yes, definitely. And not only these, I think that we have to think in many ways also how much it costs to implement technologies, or the sustainability of technologies and queries. And I'm facing this research now with knowledge graphs, of course. But I think that, yes, I think we need to sort of also calibrate technology for learning, for research, for knowing without collecting personal data. You know, like a reader wants to know a library. The library doesn't need to know the reader. And I think that not investing in knowing the reader leaves a lot of space for knowing better the collection, you know, and creating relationships and being able to show unexpected things to people, and not what a recommendation algorithm would match with you. And, you know, I think that this is it's poor in terms of knowledge. It's very useful in terms of commercial. For a bookshop is great, for a library is not really, I think.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think this is an excellent segue, Mariana, to our final panelist. Thank you for this. So I think we can stop sharing now and return to the previous view. Last but not least, I'd like to welcome Hélène, who's the founder and CEO of WildAI. Like all my guests today, she has a fascinating bio with a background in maths and finances, working in hedge fund management for Fortune 500 companies, but she's also a very impressive athlete. So I've written actually a rugby player, ultra marathon runner, triathlete, surfer, skier, ice swimmer. So Hélène, as an entrepreneur who was brought up in an arts-friendly environment, how do you feel about data and creativity? And perhaps do you feel about data differently in relation to arts than perhaps in a commercial setting?
Yeah, I think it's actually really interesting. I really enjoyed Julie's presentation because when I was studying maths, I found it was really beautiful. Like I love the pages filled of algorithm, and I was like filling pages and thinking it was really, really beautiful. But visually, I find it beautiful. What we can do with data, I think, is very powerful. And my company is called WildAI because basically the underlying is, if you understand, so we do research on the female body and translate that research into an app helping women eat and train with their female physiology, whether they menstruate, use birth control, or in menopause. And the reason it's called WildAI is that if you understand the underlying, if you understand rules and how things work, so we do that leveraging on data, you can then go beyond and reach more wilderness. So I think, I think using data actually enables us to understand a lot of things. But yeah, like the background, like just having grown into, my mother is an artist, and a lot of my family are like into art collections, and it's I think like, yeah, there's beauty in it, but there's also utility in it. And to like the topic of the panel, which is how did we use data to create what we're doing? For us, it was really creating new sets of data that don't actually exist, because the world until now, believe it or not, but has considered that women were not that interesting to analyze. So 80% of the medical research is still done on male species. And it's even worse when it comes to sports. 3 to 4% of budgets go to women only, whereas the bodies are very different. Like in the best science fiction movies where you create humans or aliens in a plastic box, women can actually do it today and have been doing it for quite a long time, and it's pretty hard. So yeah, we have a very, very powerful body, and science, literature, religions have made us think very differently. So in religion, seeing that, like, being able to believe, some people believe that the woman comes from the man, it's like, it's pretty incredible, like how our marketing has like completely turned stories around. So yeah, and to the day, research actually hasn't really analyzed women. So for instance, we don't know why women live longer than men, whereas a pretty obvious fact. We do not know, we haven't known the anatomy of the clitoris until quite recently. There's a lot of things that we don't understand, like, and that's why we use words like women are moody and bitchy and women are complicated. Because we don't understand the menstrual cycle and what women are going through. So it's easier to just spit on it and think that women are just a crazy type of being versus the norm, which is the man. So what we've done is really like creating data sets that do not exist. So what is a normal body variation for a woman? We use trackers. So we track resting heart rate variability, body temperature, and we are able to understand what are the body variations that women are going through through either her menstrual cycle or through her life, and then understand what are the needs of the body. Because if you look at the female body when she's menstruating, like a farmland with seasons, you can't really throw random crops at random times on the farmland and expect to have good outcomes. And that's really much like how we understand the female body today and treat it. So like when you're menstruating, you need iron. When you ovulate, you need fats. After ovulation, you need proteins. And if you don't respect that, you basically have permanent instabilities. But if you understand that and you can understand the female body better with data, then you can really help women reduce negative symptoms and take the most out of the bodies. So yeah, that's what we're doing, and data is absolutely crucial in what we're doing, and we really like working hard to bridge the gender data gap. Another actually example I'll give you, which is very up to date, is it's not obvious for a lot of people that research doesn't cover women, but the COVID vaccine hasn't been really tested on women. And when you take any drug, you can see on the bottle that pregnant women cannot use it. The reason is that it's not tested on pregnant women. But it's also not tested on women who take contraceptives, women who are in menopause. And you heard that blood clots are increased risk for women who take a certain type of pill. So what does it mean for other drugs? We don't know. So you had this big scandal with AstraZeneca because some people had blood clots, but the risks are much higher if you take a certain type of pill. So it actually means that women are taking drugs and training protocols and nutrition protocols that can really damage them. When you have a COVID vaccine, you don't know whether the effects on your physiology as a woman. So you know that you might have a sore arm, you might have fever, but you don't know that you may have late periods, which research showed that more than 10% of women have it. That you may have early signs of perimenopause, that you may have early periods. And all these things are actual real things. And interestingly, in a world of women, these things are not considered as health. So if you have lower back pain, is health. If you have a late period, it's not health. So yeah, it's so we are bridging that gender gap.
Thank you, Hélène. So I think this is a very important conversation, in my opinion, as well. So we've spoken a lot in the panel about data with some context in relation to some forms of technologies and situations in the natural world and digital world as well. But I think you bring in a very different perspective about data availability, which also is related perhaps to the bias discussion we had. So thank you all for sharing your views and answering my questions. So we have now, I think, around 6-7 minutes for some concluding thoughts. So I'm going to go back to something that Dave was saying about, can we hear algorithmic bias? Sonification, that's something that Julie, you also worked on. You mentioned your project on Zooniverse. Any views from the panel on whether we can hear algorithmic bias and whether we should rely on this sort of media to increase perhaps public awareness on that? Anyone? Raise your hands, like literally. Yes, Julie, please. I was hoping you would.
I think that listening to like data sonification, in the sense that it's kind of like usefully to hear the sort of glitches. Maybe our ears are really good at detecting patterns much more quickly than we are with our eyes, I think. And there's an art project by some artist called Semiconductor, who worked with solar storm data, and it's it's such a magical piece of work. And that came from one of the scientists who was he had loads of solar storm data, obviously over a massive time period, and he used to wrote a script to sonify it, and he just used to have it listen to it in his office. And then when there was some kind of unusual disturbance, he'd pick it up, but it was kind of like an ambient way of scanning the data using his ears, so it didn't impact his day. It just sat in the background. But I think it would be interesting to see whether the bias could be detected, because we're all listening with our own biases. So I mean, and also the way that you write the sonification, the bits that you pick out, what frequencies you're going to convert into whatever sound, all of that stuff needs to be, it all comes from somewhere, doesn't it?
Yeah. So last week? Yes, last week I was in this in a workshop called The Audible Universe, with a bunch of astronomers and sonification people. And I was sort of like the satellite, they called me, which I think they meant an outlier. But practically there was a very strong theme there around accessibility, around for sonification, which also made me think about digital divide more widely and ways. I mean, we talk a lot about technology and implications and biases, but I don't know how accessible these conversations are to general public and also to various types of audiences. Let me ask something else, something very different. So we all know about some digital companies that collect and hold most of the data and most of our data. What do you think should be their roles in data artworks and creative works of data? Anyone? Yes, Mariana?
Yeah, I think that what we really need is contemporary speculative theory and experiments that are outside of the rigid Silicon Valley model. I don't think we should rely too much on the big tech to support creative industries, to be honest. I think, yeah, it's a subliminal way to perpetuate like the same power structures and ideologies, and they don't allow for criticality and openness enough in their process. And although there is no doubt that they do develop valuable technologies and application, I think they should be collectivized, actually.
Perhaps the subject of a different panel.
Yeah.
Looking forward to that. Final question for me. So when we rely too much on data, so if you those of you who might remember Chris Anderson from TED Talks and Wired, he said, if there is enough data, you don't need anything else. You don't need any descriptions. You don't need any theories. How do we feel about that in creation processes and otherwise? Yes, you go.
Yeah, so I will talk about our artistic process, but I would say that it definitely shows in our work that we cannot do anything, we can't do everything with data, and that most of our work that we are most proud of are collaboration with people that do not work with data. So for instance, to create physical piece, so we would create an artwork and then collaborate on the production with people that have traditional craftsmanship knowledge. And I think this is the type of stuff that is irreplaceable, and that also many people are getting more and more interested in this type of skills that are really hard to learn. And so we definitely need many other things that only data. And data is just a tool and a material that we can use, but we definitely need to look away from our computers from time to time, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. And in that sense, I think this is almost a prompter for me to tell you to look elsewhere rather than at this screen, because We are nearing the end of the session on creating with data. So let me thank everyone, Julie, Dave, Hugo, Ellen, Mariana, for joining me here today. So with this session, we conclude the Data, Arts and Creativity program at the STARTS Day, which I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. And now I'd like to invite everyone to go back to the main stage, something called Circus des Wissens, which I think means the knowledge circus, and to Lucas, who's our host throughout the whole days of STARTS. He's going to wrap up the morning and he's going to give you a preview of what's next in the afternoon. So thank you to everyone, to the panelists and to everyone who joined us in the audience, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye.